Good evening, good afternoon, everybody. This is Forget About It. I want to welcome everybody to another episode of Poppin Politics. Here we are post presidential election, as rough and exciting and surprising as it was. We are still here nonetheless, and we are here with a great guest this evening, the Commissioner of District 6, which covers Chatham County here in the state of Georgia, Mr. Aaron Whitley. Good evening, sir. How you doing today?
Whiteley, I'm good. I'm good. Eric, how you doing, brother?
My apologies, brother. Aaron Whiteley. My apologies. My apologies. Doing
No
well, thank
problem.
you. Doing well. Doing well. With
That's
that,
good to hear.
with the election, kind of now in the rear view of everybody. With the Democratic Party, there's been a lot of finger pointing. Just days prior to that, everybody was praising the campaign, saying how great the national campaign was going. And again, with that now in the rear view, there's a lot of finger pointing going on. And with that now, it seems to be, a number of reasons as to why that loss occurred. Some say it was a time frame which with Kamala Harris had to work. Some blame her for the VP pick that she had. Some say it was because she came across a little too scripted. Regardless of the reason, from my standpoint, the Democratic Party needs to take a close look at how they approach the election and how they'll approach future elections. No polls pretty much predicted the loss, let alone the size of the loss that occurred. And so with that, the Democratic leadership needs to really take a good look in the mirror and see what went wrong, see what needs to be corrected, and really adjust as we move forward. Again, from my standpoint, and this is the opinion of Poppin Politics only, they need to take a good look at Kamala Harris and honestly put her in the forefront for 2028. Again, from my standpoint, I think she was a great candidate. She literally had 107 days to prepare for the presidential run, which was
Hmm.
unfair. I think, from my standpoint, but she did what she had to do. She put her best foot forward, and I think she ran a great campaign. But I think the Democratic Party as a whole, they need to do a better job with regard to communication. We'll get into this a little bit more as we progress during the show this evening. But um, I think overall she did a great job. She did what she could do under the circumstances. But with that, the Democratic Party needs to take a good look at that and make sure that she's at top of that ticket in 2028 if they want to have a chance at winning. Because as of right now, I believe, from my standpoint, again, that she's not only the face of the party, but she's a great face for the party. And they need to have her at the top of that ticket. With that, I'll get off of my soapbox. And again, I want to get to our guest today, Mr. Aaron Whiteley. Again, the Commissioner of District 6 that covers here Chatham County here in the state of Georgia. With that, Mr. Whiteley, if you can just give us a brief introduction as to who you
Yeah,
are, what you do, and just give us a little bit of your background if you don't mind.
absolutely. Well, first and foremost, thank you for having me on your show. And I've been following you and Forget About It for a minute, from entertainment and all that good stuff. So, I'm proud to be on here. And I know my uncle who introduced us years ago would be very proud. Now, I am the 6th District County Commissioner for Chatham County, Georgia. This district, Chatham County is where the city of Savannah is. That's our biggest municipality. And we do have 7 other municipalities or cities in Chatham County, but Savannah's the biggest one. I represent the southern side of Chatham County, about 37,000 citizens. I just won re-election, so I'm happy that the election is over. It was a really bittersweet evening for me, winning re-election, but seeing such a huge loss for Vice President Harris and Democrats in a lot of ways. But as a county commissioner, I'm, like I said, just won re-election, so I'm in my 4th year of service. Um, what county commissioners do, we're often called supervisors in other states. New York has supervisors, California has supervisors. So we are basically that buffer between the state government and the local government or city government. So if we're Atlanta falls in Fulton County, so The state, if they're giving money to the city of Atlanta, they could give the money directly to the city of Atlanta, but depending on what other projects they have going, they may give it to Fulton County to have Fulton County oversee the dispersion of that funding. Um, One of the things that we do here in Chatham County, we fund 43 essential services to include animal control, to include our court systems. Pretty much all counties fund court systems throughout the state, or excuse me, throughout the United States. Um, Cities may fund recorder's court, which is going to take care of like your local ordinances and stuff like that. But if somebody violates a state law, they're going to go to court before a judge who is paid through a county government. So that's kind of what I do. In addition to being a county commissioner, I also serve as the chairman of the Democratic Party of Chatham County, and was a surrogate for the Harris campaign. So I have a lot to say about where we are now as a party here in Georgia. I, at one point, served as the first vice chair of the African American Caucus of DPG, and resigned whenever I took leadership here at the local level so I could focus my attentions there. So that's kind of what I do. Government wise, when I'm not being a peopletician, I'm a entrepreneur. I own an early education center and a business development firm, and invest in some other ventures and help people grow their business. Serving a lot of boards and authorities here locally, also nationally through the National Association of Counties. Serve as vice chair of two different committees there. So a lot of stuff on my plate, but it's just an honor to serve. Used to serve in the military as a combat medic, deployed to Afghanistan with 2nd Battalion, 5th Infantry Regiment, and was medically retired. So I see politics and community engagement as an extension of my military service. So
Excellent.
very happy to be here.
Excellent. Again, thank you for your service as well. BB and a Marine. I definitely appreciate where you come from. Excellent. Excellent. So with that, we're gonna jump into it. We're gonna do a
Mm-hmm.
recap of the election, so to speak. Again, like I said in my monologue, it was very surprising. I went to Vice President Harris's first rally here in Atlanta back in, I want to say it was July, and just the level of excitement and energy that I felt there. It was different. I hadn't felt anything like that since former President Barack Obama ran, and I felt something different. I thought we were going in a great direction, and I thought she was running a heck of a race, and I thought we really had a legitimate chance to really win. And for her to have lost in the manner that she did, it was just about a sweep. And it wasn't only at the top of the ticket, but it was also the down ticket as well. And that was a surprise to me. What are your thoughts on election night and just how everything turned out?
Yeah. So I could say here in Chatham County, down ballot, the Democrats did very well. We flipped our sheriff seat. Our sheriff incumbent is a Republican, so that now we were elected our first African American sheriff, which is kind of crazy. We're in 2024 still electing firsts,
Right.
but nonetheless, elected our first sheriff. So down ballot here, we did good locally in Chatham County, but I think what we saw was really a culmination of a few things: a lot of voter apathy in a lot of spaces, a lot of misinformation that was effective, and also I think you hit the nail on the head in that this was a 100-day campaign for Vice President Harris, whereas Donald Trump had the opportunity to build his messaging from the time that he lost, so from 4 years ago. So
Right.
they've been coalition building for 4 years straight. And so what we saw in a lot of ways was people staying home. I know our voter turnout here in Chatham County was lower than we would have liked it to have been when President Biden was elected. Our voter turnout was at about 70%. During President Obama's second election, We were at about 69 to 70, between 69 and 71%. But this time we only got up to 68%. Again, that's as a county as a whole. But
Mhm.
one thing we saw was an influx of Republican voters. And I think the other thing was a lot of independent voters who jumped on the bandwagon with the messaging. So, definitely we as the Democratic Party, we're licking our wounds here now. But ultimately, I think we saw on election night, what we saw was Americans saying that that they wanted to see something new to some degree. I think they like the outsider persona that uh, President Trump brings, even regardless of if it's a lie or not. And again, I think when we look at the fact that we have proof that Iran, China, and Russia were putting out misinformation and disinformation through social media, which we know is incredibly consumed by the middle class, incredibly consumed by our young African Americans and just young people in general. Um, that coupled with a strong messaging campaign and disinformation campaign from the Republican side, I think that's what we saw all of that play together to create almost like a perfect storm for the Republican Party.
Agreed 100% with everything you just said. My thoughts on it is that from the Democratic Party perspective, I don't think they did enough to combat the misinformation that was being put out there, whether it was coming from the clickbait that you see on social media, or if it was even coming from the Trump campaign directly. Um, you know, to me, at least from my standpoint, if I ran a campaign, especially a campaign at that level, I would have someone designated specifically or a team of people just solely to combat the misinformation because I think that they let the things that they were put out there linger and they
Yeah.
didn't do enough to kind of quell it. And so, in the day and age that we live in with regard to the amount of information that's out there and the speed at which people take in this information, they have to me, jump on that stuff immediately. Because if you allow it to stay out there for so long, eventually it's going to start to sink into the public. It's going to start to sink into the mental. And I think that's what happened. Whether it would be the information about the trans surgeries, or even something as simple as inflation. I've said before countless times on this program that the inflation piece was caused by three components. It was the checks that were cut under the Trump administration. It was the pandemic itself, and then it were the checks that the Biden administration did cut as well. Those are the three primary drivers of what caused the inflation that we've realized over the last 3 years. But that was never really specified and brought to the forefront by the Harris administration. It was just allowed to be put out there as Bidenomics. And I think that played a huge part in people's mentality as far as how they looked at the election, how they viewed the Biden administration. And I think had they just really detailed exactly what caused the inflation, I think that may have put somewhat of a dent in people's mentality or perspective as to the economy for one because again they put everything solely on the lap of the Biden administration, which again, understanding that Trump didn't initiate the checks that were cut under him, it was done in a bipartisan way, but he
Right.
did even pause those checks, the distribution of those checks, just to have his name put on them. But they were cut under his administration nonetheless. And so I
Yeah.
think that a better job should have been done to really jump on things such as that, because again, information is key, especially when it comes to an election and an election in which Kamala Harris only had 107 days to run. They needed to make sure that they did what they could to dead any misinformation that was out there and ensure that clarity was put out there because again, she was going against the headwinds to begin with. And so with that, if you're going against a headwind like an inflation piece, you have to do everything you can to combat any negative piece that's out there about that. And I don't think they did enough to combat that. The crime
Oh,
component as well. I'm sorry, go ahead.
well, so I want to push back on that a little bit. Again, I served as a surrogate, right? And then I chair a local party. So we there was a lot of effort there. The challenge was a few things. One, when you have the same message being echoed over and over and over, it's hard to go and cover everybody who's ingested that message, right? And what I mean by that, again, we have proof that, again, Iran, Russia, and China interfered in some way. A lot of it was through social media. And so when you have a ton of basically foreign surrogates putting out this message, um, it's hard to combat that. But the Biden administration was putting that information out. The issue was the dissenters, those who were following up on the misinformation and stuff like that, those who were standing by the misinformation, there were a larger group. And so what we saw in the last 100 days, you saw an effort to try to quell some of that stuff, to really talk about the fact that, like you said, Donald Trump held up aid to get his name on the check. Inflation was caused by a number of factors. Local oil production is at an all-time high. The economy was bouncing back. The economy was doing a lot better thanks to the infrastructure bill, thanks to the CHIPS Act, and so on and so forth. Plants were not leaving America. Plants, I know here in Savannah, in Bryan County, a neighboring county to us, Hyundai put a meta plant. They put their United States headquarters for building electric vehicles right here in my backyard. It just opened and put out the first vehicles about in October, the beginning of October. So we're trying to put the information out, but when you have so much misinformation and disinformation taking place in so many different areas, it's hard to go and undo that. And so when you've got it, I'm talking about, it was everywhere. It's on World Star Hip Hop. It's on social media, X, Threads, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, all of these outlets that people are looking at, habitually.
Right.
There people will pick up their phone multiple times in the midst of a conversation with you. So it's hard to combat that. But the administration and the campaign did do what we could to get that out. The challenge was when the switch happened, there was a big stall for us, because now we've got to change all of our graphics, all the logos and all that good stuff. So yeah, we're doing some. I know I did a few press conferences in between that time while I'm getting blown up asking for signs. Well, we're trying to print signs.
Right.
But the machine pretty much stayed the same. But again, Vice President Harris had her own vision on what she wanted to do. And a challenge that really tipped it over the edge, if you ask me, is that because she was part of this administration and that messaging was blaming everything on Bidenomics, like you said, she didn't have enough time to share her own vision. Because
Right.
as vice president, you tell me what policy that a vice president put forth that you remember and love. You tell me what a Dick Cheney did or Al Gore did that you say, man, I tell you what, Dick Cheney did a hell of a job with this.
Right.
You'll be hard pressed to find that, because they play second fiddle. So she had a too short of a window to show who she was as a leader, as opposed to serving as the vice president when you're in a subservient role in that piece. And
Right.
so I think that really hurt her.
I agree with you about 99.9%. Again, from my standpoint, I think that what the Democratic Party needs to do going forward is be just as aggressive with the press, with the messaging, as the Republican Party was in this scenario, in this campaign. I agree with you with regard to the World Star Hip Hops out there, the CNNs, the MSNBCs. The Democratic Party needed to be out there pounding their chest. That's not accurate. This is what the truth is. Again, if they have to take out ads and actually be on a commercial with a whiteboard breaking down for everybody, this is what happened with inflation. This is what happened with this. This is where the crime is. This is where we are with regard to drilling. Whatever they had to do to get it into the membrane of the general public. Because again, to a certain extent, that's what the Republican Party did. That's what, as off script as we want to say Donald Trump was when he gave his speeches, when he did speak, they took that information in, and I again I did not vote for Trump. I trust me on that one. And as I stated before, I'm not against the Republican Party, but I was against what he stands for. Because I think honestly, to a great extent, again, I've said it before on this program, I think the Republican Party does have certain aspects that could help our communities. They aren't the Republican Party historically um, is not what we see today by any stretch of the imagination. It's on a whole different level. And something that I don't really like to even touch whatsoever. But the Republican Party, let's say from even as recent as say the George W. Bush era, to me they still had aspects that would benefit that could and would benefit our community potentially. But the Republican Party of today, that's just something that's totally it's almost cult like, to be honest with
Yeah.
you.
You know,
Um,
I'll say one thing, Eric. When you talk about the Republican Party, and folks might get upset with me about this, but I think generally speaking, um, you've got the Republican Party, then you have conservative ideals. And
right,
I think when you look at historically, African Americans are generally conservative.
agreed.
When we go back to, when the civil rights movement was taking place, before the war on drugs, marriage was a necessity.
Yeah,
Abortion was a no-go. um, you know, being fiscally conservative was a necessity for Black folks. And so to say that, I understand where you're coming from when you say there's aspects of the Republican Party that will benefit the African American community. I understand that when you say that, because I think that we get there when we talk about conservative ideas. I'm a Democrat. I'm a moderate. I'm fiscally conservative.
right,
I think that I believe in marriage, and I came from a single parent household. You know, I don't agree with abortion. However, I do not think the government should tell you what to do with your body. And because
exactly.
if the government tells my daughter what she has to do, they had the heartbeat bill. What if they came up with the sock or the t-shirt bill for men? And every time you busted an unworthy load, you can go to jail for it. You know
Right.
what I mean? So I don't think government should step in that kind of spot. But nonetheless, the Republican Party of today is not about conservatism. Conservatism. It is about Donald Trump, and it is about misinformation. And I dare say on this point, and look, judging by some of the rhetoric that we're hearing, it's about white supremacy. And some of those Dixiecrats who left the Strom Thurmonds and those folks who were Democrats who left the Democratic Party to go to the Republican Party because the Republican Party at that time was against the Civil Rights Act. That was where we saw a big shift. But they're really reigning there, and they are stewing in this whole "I don't want white society to die" piece. And so
Right.
now we have to, as an African American community, we have to a get back to some of those principles that got us through a lot of that drama, that got us through Jim Crow and so on and so forth. I did a post on social media where I said the principles of Kwanzaa are what are going to get us through the next 4 years. Collective work. Supporting each other's businesses. So on and so forth. These are going to be the things that move us forward, because if we look at it from a Democrat versus Republican thing, we'll never win, because they are using that as a way to dilute who we
Right.
are. We as Black folks are beefing with other Black folks about Democrat and Republican, not understanding that there are two wings on the same bird going the same place.
Yeah.
What section are we gonna carve out for ourselves? And while we point fingers and beef with each other, we're gonna continue to watch white supremacists create ideals under the guise of, oh, it's the economy. That's why I voted for Trump. It's
Right.
not about the bigotry. It's not about, the felonies and all that. Even though I don't like you with your felonies, I won't hire you with your felonies. But it's not about his felonies. It's about the economy and stuff like that. They're going to continue to hide under those guises and put us in a situation where we're picking sides in a fight that isn't for us.
Agreed. And I agree to a certain extent. From my standpoint, I think that there is a segment of those that follow Trump that are on, you know, the whole Dixiecrat piece, as you mentioned. But I think there are a lot of folks out there too. Um, I'm even related to one, to be honest, or a couple, that follow Trump that are under the misconception of, oh, things are better for me under the economy that he had, and I've had really heated discussions with some folks around that when they say that to me, oh, I follow Trump because the economy was better when he was president. My response to that was, why was the economy better under Trump, or did it appear to be better under Trump? It was because he was
Okay.
handed a stable economy from Barack Obama of 72
Mm-hmm.
consecutive months of growth. When Barack
Mm-hmm.
Obama took office, he took office in the midst of a financial crisis where we were headed towards depression. And he stabilized the economy. And not only did he stabilize it, but he began to grow it. And so he had consistent growth when he handed Trump the economy. It was stable and it was ready to grow to the next level. Whereas for Biden, similar situation, he came in the midst of the pandemic. The economy was in a downfall, in a huge spiral. The country as a whole was in a spiral. Biden came in, he did what he had to do to stabilize it, and then began to grow. 3 years ago, inflation was over 5-6%. He stabilized it and began to bring it back down to where now we're just below 2.5%. With regard to the inflation piece, to me, again, going back to our discussion a moment ago, that to me should have been emphasized a lot more. If a lot of the surrogates that were on the CNN, because I watch CNN quite a bit. I follow them because I think that they're more or less in the middle, comparable to MSNBC and then Fox News. To me, CNN's kind of in the middle. And I follow them quite a bit. And those surrogate that I ever saw on there really put their foot down and said, no, this is what occurred. This is what they've done. And had they not done this, this would be where we are. I did see some pieces on social media. I believe it was John Hope Bryant, I believe, who's an African American businessman that's out there. He did start to articulate that towards the latter part of the campaign. But to me, not enough of that was really put in the forefront as far as the folks that were out there on the national stage who were supposed to be out there really talking about where we were with everything. And so with that, I think that going forward, we need to do very much what the Republican Party has done. Again, is pound that chest, get out there and really put your foot down. And this is our message. This is what we've done. This is where we're going to be if we follow this path versus that path, and really be forceful with that message, because we can't at this point allow us to be kind of the nice guys, I guess you can say, for lack of a better phrase. We have to really
Right.
get out there and make sure the message is being heard and not only heard, but understood. Because you can go
Right.
out there and speak and yell all day long, but if your message isn't um, being heard or being felt or understood, it's irrelevant. So you need to go
Right.
out there and make sure that people are really hearing what we're having to say and they're hearing the truth, you know. And that's, to me, again, the path that we need to be on as a party is just that, making sure that we're putting forth the right message and, just making sure that people understand exactly what's taking place. Because
Mm.
again, we're in a very fast information age. Information is being fed to us 24 hours a day at 100 miles an hour. So with that said, the information that's being put out there, we need to make sure that the right information is being taken in.
Mhm.
And we can't just allow just be out there speaking and hope that they catch it. No, this is where we are. Hit the pause button for a minute, and it's possible to do. Hit that pause button and say, "This is where we are. This is the message. Take it in." Hopefully, if the Democratic Party is smart, they'll put Kamala at the top of the ticket. Come 2028, and she has the opportunity at that point to really run a full campaign do the full, gambit of town halls, go to the small towns, the rural areas, the big cities, and really do it the right way and not to have to go 150 miles an hour trying to get to as many spots as she can within a 90-day time frame.
Mhm.
But to me, again, to me, communication was paramount with regard to this campaign from both sides of it. And unfortunately, due to the time frames that we all had kind of had to work with, you know, she only can do what she can do. The folks that were associated with the campaign could only do what they could do. So again, hopefully come 2028, she's at the top of that ticket. I wasn't a huge fan of her vice presidential pick, to be honest. I had hoped that she had chosen Shapiro, Governor Shapiro out of Philadelphia to me, or out of Pennsylvania rather. To me, that would have been the right pick, but only not only that, the better strategic pick, because you needed Pennsylvania, and your chances of winning Pennsylvania would have been that much better had she gone that route. And again, it's about playing chess, not checkers. And to me, that would have been a great chess move. And again, I'm a huge Kamala fan. I really wish that she would have won, but again, we just have to be more aggressive as we move forward and really be more strategic with regard to how we go about things. Because honestly, the Republican Party this time around, as much as people wanted to knock the Trump campaign, they are very strategic about the way they went about things. Understanding he was off script probably 75% of the time, it worked. And I don't want her to be as on script. I want her to be able to show herself who she is from a personality perspective and not come across as scripted as she did in a lot of cases. Because I think if she does that, I think she win even more votes because I think, from what I've seen and what I've heard about her and what I've learned about her, her personality will shine through. And it did from time to time during the course of the campaign. But again, going back to the time frame she had to work with, it was in her best interest in that scenario to be more scripted versus going off script. So again, with that, I think that I just hope that the Democratic Party just take a deep breath, really think things through, and make those better moves as we move forward. So with that, going on to the next piece here, what do you think the fallout of the Kamala Harris loss is going to be, not only necessarily to the Democratic Party, but to our politics as a whole?
I think that, well, what we're seeing now is, here in the state of Georgia, you've got a group of folks who are calling for the resignation of the chairwoman of the DPG. And I don't agree with that, because it's like now, after the fact, now we're gonna just kill ourselves. We're gonna turn on each other now and beat each other up now because we lost. No,
Right,
let's regroup. There's a few things we really got to talk about, and I think that some tough conversations are coming. I know myself personally, I've got some things I've got to say that I plan on sharing with state party leadership and DNC leadership, as it relates to our messaging, as it relates to what we lead with. I think that when we lean so heavily into minority constituency groups. Now, hear me when I say that. When I say minority, I think it's easy to just assume about black folks. No, it's not what I'm
I,
not
I
necessarily
think
saying that.
I think I know where you're going with it. Go ahead, though.
You know, when we look at the population, when we are one thing that's known is that without the black vote, the Democratic Party doesn't win.
Right,
Right? Without the black vote, without black turnout, the Democratic Party doesn't win. Well, when we are leading our messaging about things and leading fights, fighting tooth and nail for constituency groups that make up a very small percentage of our populace, you know, then it's going to turn off a lot of those folks who are like, wait, you wasn't fighting like that for me.
right,
And so now don't get me wrong, the Democratic Party has been who has fought for African Americans. So don't get me wrong. But again, a few things that turned some black folks off that made black folks want to stay home. How do we get a anti-Asian hate bill and we can't get an anti-lynching bill
right.
under a Democratic administration? And if Joe Biden wanted to atone for his work on the crime bill, that would have been the perfect thing to do. You know, how do we get on Easter Sunday uh, Transgender Rights Day or something like that put out
Right.
on Easter Sunday? Mind you, going back to that point that I made earlier, African Americans, though we generally vote Democrat, we are traditionally conservative people.
Right.
You know what I mean? It is, so how can you do that and then expect us to jump on the ship?
Agree.
And so
Agree.
again, so you're doing these things for a constituency group, which, don't get me wrong, I have no problem with that, with the LGBTQ community, transgender rights, or anything like that. I have my own opinions as it relates to transgenders in sports and stuff like that. But
Right.
we're fighting about bathrooms, but we just watch multiple African Americans get killed at the hands of police, and we can't get an anti-African American hate bill. We can't
Right.
get an anti-lynching crime bill. So these are things that make African Americans say, well, let me listen to what these other folks are saying, because at least, they're at least talking to me and not
Exactly.
talking through me. And so I think in a lot of ways, when we talk about the fallout, it's going to be a lot of tough conversations and a lot of, I know here locally, a few, some more strategy plays. One is, we're going to campaign for those elected officials who are in office now, those Democratic elected officials who are doing what we want them to do. We're going to go and canvass for them now. We're going to go and engage the community on their behalf now.
Right.
So then when election time comes, people have heard about what they're doing. So kind of to your point, the beating our chest and stuff like that, we got to do that throughout these 4 years. So when I think about the opportunity that Vice President Harris has, she has the opportunity now to go ahead and do the campaign that she wanted to do the right way, cooking it on low and slow
Right.
rather than trying to microwave it. Um, Something else that comes to mind is having a bigger discussion about our messaging when it comes to a few things. One thing that gets me a lot, like I told you earlier, I'm an entrepreneur. Why is the Republican Party like the party of business?
Right.
Like, when you think about business and who's looking out for the small businesses and stuff like that, typically you hear, oh, that's the Republicans thing. Why?
Right.
Most of us Democrats are business owners ourselves in
Right.
some way or another. So I think that's one piece of messaging we got to talk about or change, is we need to get into the discussion about business as well. We cannot allow the Republican Party to monopolize the discussion on business. When it comes to voter rights and stuff like that, the Republican Party has been anti-voter rights. They have been rolling back, especially in southern states. They've been rolling back, the opportunity for folks to vote in things that benefit folks, or make it easier to vote. They've been dialing that stuff back.
Right.
We need to shout that more from the mountaintop. We need to highlight that. We need to talk about, okay, not only this is what these guys are doing to usurp your rights as an American, this is what we are doing to support your rights as an American. So we have to do a better job at that.
Agreed 100%. With that, gotta take a quick commercial break, and then we'll go ahead and catch it or continue this discussion on the other side of the break. We'll be right back after these messages.
Un tabaquito con ron con con. Un tabaquito con ron con con. Para mi mamita que me quita mi bombón. Un tabaquito con ron con con. Un tabaquito con ron con con. Para mi mamita que me quita mi bombón. Un tabaquito con ron con con. Un tabaquito
Welcome back on the other side of the break from Poppin Politics. We're here with Commissioner Aaron Whiteley from the District 6, which covers Chatham County. The bigger city out there would be Savannah, Georgia, for those that don't know. And we're continuing our discussion around the Democratic Party and what needs to be done on a go-forward basis following, or with the fallout rather, of this past election, with Kamala Harris losing to, or Vice President Harris rather losing to now President Donald Trump. So with that, Aaron, going forward for 2028, one, do you feel that Vice President Harris should run again? If she does, who would you like to see as her running mate? Or who else in the party do you think would make a good running mate for her potentially?
Well, I think that she should definitely be a candidate for the primary. Uh, um, to become the Democratic nominee. I think that a lot can happen in these next 4 years.
Right.
We've seen, I mean, think about if we just go to Georgia for a second. When you think about, look at John Ossoff and Raphael Warnock. I mean, it was just yesterday, these guys were vying for Senate seats. Now they're national names,
Right.
right? So anything can happen in these 4 years. And I say that to say, when you talk about who a vice presidential candidate would be, there's a long list of people. I like Vice President Harris. I think that she makes a great candidate. I would vote for her again. If I want to be pragmatic, I would say that I wonder if America is ready for a woman president. We just saw again, and some will say arguably bigotry and misogyny won on election night. And so with that, is America, those independents, is America, those moderate Republicans, ready to vote for a woman?
Yeah.
It's a tough call. And so, I think that Kamala Harris makes a great candidate. I think Kamala Harris, again, I would vote for her in the primary. So let's be clear here. I'm
Right.
not speaking against her. But again, for the sake, this is popping politics, and we got to talk about what's popping, what's in the barbershop, what's in, what they're talking about at the cookouts too, not just what we want to hear.
Right.
And that's a tough question that we've got to ask ourselves. And if we don't think that at midterms, perhaps we can get a little bit of a indication on what that looks like when we see what takes place at midterms. But if midterms doesn't really turn the tide for us, if we can't gain back control of one of the houses in the Congress, we may need to consider going to a formula that we know can work rather than the history making formula. Because right now, what we saw this election, again, we can argue about the time frame. We could argue about the fact that, again, Vice President Harris had a 100-day campaign, but she lost in a landslide.
Right. Right.
She lost the popular vote and the electoral college vote. Is America ready for a woman president? We have to be honest with ourselves about that.
Agreed. I think America, honestly, I think America is ready. I think America is ready for a female president. But I think honestly, a good portion, a good percentage of those who voted for Donald Trump were, for lack of a better phrase, kind of misguided, or they kind of, they drank the Kool-Aid. Because again, a lot of the folks that I had conversations with, when they said that they were supporting Trump, again, it was because of the economy. It was, and that was the crux of it, to be honest. For the good number of people that I spoke with about it, it was about the economy. And again, it was the misperception of the economy with regard to how they benefited under his presidency as it pertained to the economy. And so to me, again, it was just a matter of had things been communicated to them a bit clearer, perhaps, I think we would have won more of that. Because it really surprised me, especially after the Madison Square Garden rally, that he still got a significant number of Latinos to vote for him. That surprised the heck out of me. I wasn't expecting that. I thought that would have just killed any kind of support that he would have had as it pertains to the Latino community, especially. And I think going forward, honestly, I think the African American community and the Latino community need to do a lot more to come together, especially politically, because we share a lot of the same interest. We share a lot of the same communities. And I think it would be in both communities' best interest to really start working more in tandem, and not allow the politics of the U.S. or America to separate us. And I think that's basically what separates us today. Me being from San Diego, California, I grew up very close to the Latino community. They were my neighbors, my friends, my best friends growing up. And so with that, I think we have a lot more in common that we have that separates us. And I think that as a Democratic Party, I think it would be in everyone's best interest if, again, we did more to bring the Latino community and the African American community closer, and really combine that messaging and don't separate the messaging between the two communities, but bring us more under the same umbrella and move forward together. I think that would be huge if we were able to do that in some form or fashion. And I think if we don't do that, I think we're still setting ourselves up for failure to some extent, because we're going to allow the other party to kind of separate and segment, percentages of us away. And again, I think that's going to set us up for failure, not only in the next major election, but future elections as well. I agree with you 100% that I think we can do some big things in the midterms in a couple of years, because I think that the Trump administration is going to do enough damage to where it isn't going to be that difficult. How I see the cabinet kind of lining up, it's going to be an interesting couple of years, to say the least, as to what the administration is going to do going forward. But I think that over the next 2 years, we need to definitely improve the messaging. Again, bring the African American community and the Latino community closer together, and just really, again, look in the mirror and decide what that message is going to be going forward as a whole. Because again, it's just I'm still kind of, I won't say in shock, but I'm still just kind of really taking a look at election night last week, because again, it's still a huge surprise to me, not only that they won, but they won at the rate that they did win. I wasn't expecting that by any stretch of the imagination. But with that, what do you think the fallout overall is going to be of a Trump presidency? Whether it be domestically, international, what do you think that's going to look like potentially?
Yeah, so before I answer that, I want to kind of qualify my answers by sharing a little bit about what I do, right? So, like I said earlier, I serve as the vice chair of the International Economic Development Task Force for NACO, which is the National Association of Counties. That is basically the lobbying arm for counties across the country. When we have our meetings in Washington, the president and multiple members of the administration normally come and speak to us, right? I've done economic development work with Africa, with some Europeans. And to be honest, I think the fallout is going to be that we're going to see our standing as a nation's power go away. I had the opportunity to entertain members of the Swedish parliament. There's about 6 women from Swedish parliament. They came into Savannah. I hosted them at our county office. We went and had breakfast. And we talked about why they were here. And they were here because they were concerned about this election and they wanted to see it for themselves and what was going on. We had Carl Bloom, who's another member of the Swedish parliament in town. I did multiple interviews with Finnish television and the Finnish public broadcasting network for Finland. Canadian news sources, and everybody is terrified because what America has served as is, kind of like the world police in a lot of ways,
Right.
but also our support through NATO, our support through, if we look at like, what we're seeing with the Ukraine, we've been that big brother who steps in all over the place,
Right.
and they're concerned. So I think that we'll see. I'm afraid. I hope it's not the case. I hope I'm proven wrong, but I'm afraid that we're going to be looked at as kind of like the laughing stock of the world. The big power who had it all together. The homecoming king and queen who got hooked on dope and fell off.
Right.
And I'm afraid of that, unfortunately, because when just looking at these picks for his cabinet, understanding that the Republican Party has control of both the House and the Senate, the fact that we're going to see deregulation take place, from FDA standpoint, which is going to hurt some of our allies and hurt some of our relationships with other nations. The Paris Accords, we talk about that as we talk about the road to carbon neutrality. When we talk about defense spending and our lane and our world now, with America having footprints throughout the world, our foreign relations are going to suffer. And if
Right.
Marco Rubio is our Secretary of State, I pray that what he has shown us up to this point, I hope that he comes with something more as a Secretary of State. And because I'll tell you, you'll go to these other countries and I see Marco Rubio as a switch sider. There was at one point Marco Rubio had nothing but bad stuff to say about Trump. Now he's going to be the Secretary of State. These foreign nations, they can smell that on
Right.
you. They can smell that you don't know what you're talking about. They can tell when you're scared as soon as you step off that plane.
Right.
You talking about some real G's out here, some real gangsters.
Yeah. It's
So so I'm afraid that the nation America, as the world knows it, is
mm,
no longer going to be there. That it's going to be something different, and that we're going to spend the next 10 to 15, if not 20 years, trying to make up for this gaffe. But I pray that I'm wrong and I'm proven wrong. And if I am wrong, I'll come right back here on Poppin Politics and say, you know what, Eric, I was wrong. Up
right.
until then, as Juvenile said, the words of Mr. Terrius Gray, up until then, I'm going to be ducking behind the project built in.
I think I agree with you. A good portion of what you said. I think it's going to come down to, honestly, is I'm seeing Trump surround himself with people that are not known to criticize him or tell him no. And in any leadership position, whether you're the coach of a football team, the CEO of a company, let alone being the president of the United States, you need folks around you who I won't say necessarily even tell you no, but at least provide insight or try to guide your decisions. And from what I've seen of Trump, I don't know the guy personally by any stretch of the imagination. I've met a couple of people who work with him on a business level, but he has to be the smartest person in the room. And I've been a leader in a lot of cases, being in the Marine Corps and other facets of my life, and other folks that I've known who are CEOs, et cetera, you know, and a lot of people that have mentored me, they've never wanted to be the smartest person at the table. They want to
Mm-hmm.
surround themselves with the smartest people in their respective positions. And they're there to kind of facilitate that intellect, facilitate that genius that each person that they brought to the table kind of holds. Um, and when you want to be the smartest person in the room, that means pretty much the people around you aren't as smart as you. And so why would you want that? And it just seems that that's what he's doing. That's what he's done. That's also what he's doing. And when you're in a position as he is, being in the most powerful office in the world, that's not a good thing. Um, so I really can't call it. I'm just gonna hope and pray for the best, to be honest with you. With regard to what's gonna happen as we move forward. I'm hopeful, cautiously hopeful that what he does is try to ensure that his legacy is one that goes down as being one of the greatest presidents in history on a number of levels, but not from a dictatorial or some authoritarian type of situation that he's spoken so highly of in the past. Um, it's going to be very interesting. It's almost no words for it as to what the expectations are. Because again, we're seeing the formation of his cabinet as we move forward. About 2 hours ago, he nominated Matt Gaetz as his attorney general. And I couldn't believe that one. This is somebody
Right.
who's been under ethics investigation. He's been under criminal investigation for having sex with underage girls. Even some of his Republican colleagues were interviewed today and stated that he would go around the Senate or the congressional floor showing videos of the different women that he slept with. I'm just like, that's Attorney General is one of the most powerful
Right.
offices in the land. That's
Crazy.
the top law enforcement officer of the country. And to even consider someone who's been under, let's call it ethical investigation or ethics investigation, but criminal investigation,
Mhm.
um, it makes you just shake your head, honestly, because we're in a place now politically where nothing surprises us, and it's almost that's a sad thing in itself. Even going back, just taking a step back here real quick, as far as what Republicans say when they try to defend Donald Trump, no matter what he says, they say, "Oh, that's just Trump." So we've grown so numb as a country to where things can come out of someone seeking the highest office of the land's mouth that comes out of his mouth and just kind of shake it off or wave it off. Oh,
Right.
that's what he says. When 15 years ago, if anybody, let alone a politician, would say some of the stuff that he says, they would
Oh,
have been run out of town, and
I'm telling you.
they couldn't look back. So I think we're in a very interesting place in our country's history to where we can go a couple of different directions. We could either go further down the wormhole that we're going down now, um, and no telling where that would lead us. Or two, we can kind of get back to who we are as a country and really get some decorum about not only us as a general public, but ensuring that those who we elect to office have some type of decorum and rapport about themselves. And the people that we want to represent us, in office, they hold themselves to a certain standard. They conduct themselves in a certain way. We knew back in the
Right.
day, 20 years ago, that people didn't like George W. Bush for Iraq, whatever the case was, but there was a level of respect still there.
Mm-hmm.
There was a level of decorum still there. Since Trump has come into the picture, it's a bunch of name calling. It's like 10-year-olds. You hear them say things
Yeah.
like you have to take his cell phone away from him because he can't stay focused. He won't stay on message. And it's like you're describing a 10-year-old with ADD, and that's where we are as a nation at this point. And it's to me, I think it's pretty sad. But I think again, it's gonna take the adults in the room to really stand up and really take a look and where we are and make better decisions as we move forward to ensure that we do what we can to get the right people in office. And I'm not going to even dictate and say, okay, it should be a Democrat or it should be a Republican, but get somebody
Right.
in that office that we all can say that's our president and we all be proud of that, or at least know from a respect and decorum perspective that that's our president. We may not agree with that individual from a policy perspective, and they may not be from the same side of the aisle that we're from, but nonetheless, that's our president. At the end of the day, and during the course of after the aftermath of 9/11, you know, people didn't necessarily agree with George W. Bush as far as policy, but we were still able to look at him and say, that's our president.
Right.
Nonetheless, I tell people, I've said it before on the show, I voted for George W. Bush twice because at the time I felt that he was the better leader for that time. I wasn't a big fan of Al Gore and I wasn't a big fan of John Kerry. Um, and so with that, I don't look at party a lot of times and I vote. I try to vote for the better person
Mhm.
because the better or the better candidate or the person that the Democrat may not be the better person for me or to me at
Right.
that point. They were same thing with the Republican, but I want to vote for the better person because I think what's happening nowadays is it's too much of this tribalism where people are voting more so for the party versus looking at the person and looking at the country as a whole. And I think we need to get away from that or not allow ourselves to kind of fall into that because once you start looking at party over country, we find ourselves in the situation that we're in now.
Mhm.
Um, and so with that, it's just like I said, it's gonna be interesting to see what happens as we move forward. Um, but with that, I'm gonna give you a piece if you want to have something you want to say to close everything out, and then I'll go ahead and I'll give my closing as well.
Yep. Well, again, I want to thank you for having me here. I appreciate the opportunity to kick it with you and talk on Poppin Politics, and shout out to the Poppin Politics family who are tuning in. I just want to say that these next 4 years, I believe, are going to define life as we know it for those of us who are 40 and up. Life as we know it for the rest of our life will, in a lot of ways, be defined by these next 4 years. I'm not necessarily only talking about presidential policies, but more so how we as a community react, how we as a community operate. So I want to encourage everybody to be encouraged. Don't tune out. Stay in the mix. Stay involved. And remember that all politics are local. So get engaged in your local elected bodies. Pay attention to what's happening in your neighborhood because at the end of the day, the president is going to be the president, but that pothole is going to tell you to get a front end alignment. It's not going to tell you what bathroom to use or to make America great again. And that pothole is fixed locally. So the last thing I want to say is for my Democrats who are tuning in, I think the worst thing we could do right now is look ourselves in the mirror, look at our colleagues, and start pointing fingers of the coulda, shoulda, woulda. We can do an after action review of some sort, but then it's time to move forward because in 2 years we have midterms and we have a responsibility to get some sort of control in one of the houses of Senate, excuse me, of the Congress. So don't check out. Don't check out. Don't check out. We need you to be informed. We need every one of you to help spread the truth to combat the misinformation that we're seeing. It's already been proven and shared by our FBI and our National Security Agency that China, Russia, as well as Iran have engaged in a misinformation campaign to help Americans destroy ourselves from within. Let's not let them be successful. Don't turn on your neighbor because they voted for Trump. That's their right. This is America. I may not agree with Trump's policies. I have my feelings about those who voted for Trump, but what I'm not going to do is sit on here and insult them. What I'm not going to do is sit here and cuss them out because that's not going to help us as a country. So I just want to urge everybody to keep the main thing the main thing. Don't check out, stay engaged. Midterms in 2 years, and chances are you've got a local election happening next May or next November. So get in the game.
Agreed. And with that, in closing, thank you very much for that statement there. In closing, I want to piggyback on what you said and encourage our listeners um, to to understand that this is only politics. You know, don't understanding that you may not agree with your neighbors, with your family, who may have voted for Trump or voted for the Democrats, whatever the case may be. This isn't anything to lose relationships over. As Mr. Whiteley mentioned, that your local government and your state government has more to do with you and for you on a day-to-day basis than who sits in that Oval Office. Though the person in the Oval Office, they do represent us as a country. Your local and state representatives do more for you in your lives on a day-to-day basis. Stay engaged, stay involved, don't tune out, because this is a consistent thing. Just because the national election is over doesn't mean that everything stops. It doesn't mean that politics stops per se. But stay engaged in your respective communities. Re-engage with those that you may have lost touch with during the course of this election because of different views and perspectives. But just ensure that you don't lose relationships. You don't damage relationships just because of how someone voted or how you voted. It isn't worth it at the end of the day, because at the end of the day, your friends, your family, that's what matters the most, not who sits in that Oval Office. So with that, again, in closing, stay involved, stay engaged. And with that, I thank you for tuning in to this episode of Poppin Politics. I thank our guest, Mr. Aaron Whiteley, District 6 Commissioner of Chatham County here in Georgia. And with that, forget about it. On behalf of my co-host, DJ King Majesty, who's out today, I want to say thank you again. Please continue to tune in. Thank you for the support. Go on YouTube, subscribe to Poppin Politics. And with that, we'll see you guys next week. Peace.